Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Gayatri, and I'm pleased to introduce you to our guest speaker for today's webinar, Ms. Dari Vaidya. Ms. Vaidya has over 4 years of experience in the field of corporate finance and is currently a financial analyst at a leading IB. We are delighted to have her here with us today to enrich us on the topic investment insights and financial management. Ma'am, over to you.
Thanks, Gayatri, for the lovely introduction. A very good evening to all of you. It is indeed an honor to address an audience like you. Now, without wasting further time, I will directly start off the session by quoting what Albert Einstein had once said. Compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it, earns it. He who doesn't, pays for it. Indeed, that is the power of compounding. I would now like to share my screen and give you further insights on the same. Do let me know if my screen is visible to all of you.
Yes, ma'am, visible.
It is visible? Okay. Now, like I said, that is the power of compounding, which makes your money grow faster than any other rates of interest, than any other types of interest. Everything is involved in money, each and every transaction. Say you stay at a particular place for a particular period of time, you need to pay money in the form of rent. Say you work for a company, a person, you will be paid money in the form of salary. Similarly, if you keep your savings or money with bank is bound to reward you financially by paying you interest on the same. Hence, it is extremely imperative to know what kind of interest is giving you the maximum amount of return. So, like I said, nowadays, given the scenario, money can't be kept idle. It has to grow. The rate at which it grows has to increase over a period of time. And you, as an investor, will need to see to it that you enjoy the maximum benefits arising out of it. So, like I mentioned previously, there are mostly two kinds of interest. One would be compound, and the other one would be simple interest. If I just show you the next slide, you would know that compound interest is much more different than simple interest and much beneficial also, in the sense that when you say that interest is charged on compound basis, you mean that interest is charged on not only the initial investment which you did, on not only the principal amount, but also on the interest accumulated previously, which is to say that it is an interest on interest, which is the reason why compound interest will give you better returns, faster returns than simple rate of interest. What simple interest does is simply charges you a plain rate of interest, a uniform rate of interest on the initial investment, which is, let's say, principal. That is the only reason why you see that compound and simple interest over a period of time will show you a good gap in the returns. Now, if you just focus on the formula which is mentioned for compound interest, you would know that A would stand for amount and P stands for the initial investment, which is principal. Amount is nothing but a product of the principal multiplied by the compounding rate. Please note that R stands for rate, and over here in the examples which I'll show in the coming slides, you would see that I have taken a period of 12 months, and 12 months would be 1 year. Not necessary that each and every interest is compounded on per annum basis. It can also be compounded on quarterly basis, on a semi-yearly basis, half-yearly basis. But then for our convenience, for clarity, I have chosen N as 12. So effectively, it will be just 1. And the interest, the compound interest formula would be nothing but amount minus the initial investment, which is the principal. So compound interest, or for that matter interest, be it compound or simple, would be nothing but the difference between the amount and the principal, the initial investment. Simple interest, on the other hand, would be the plain rate of interest charged on the initial investment. So amount will be the summation of the both. SI is P into R into T. If you would like to take a glance at the right side of the slide, you would see that for the first year, for any investment you make, for the first year, your compound interest and simple interest will remain the same. It is over a period of time, you will see that there is a gap, which is to say that your compound interest grows, and it grows as a good rate as you can see, and simple interest grows uniformly. Oh yeah. Now if I'm just to show you the calculations, how I did, I made a few assumptions over here. I took the initial investment as 100 and I took the rate of interest charged as 10%. Like I said, I took 10% for per annum, which is for 12 months. Now I see the compound interest formula is this, simple interest is this, and now I would like to show you the calculations. If you would focus on column B and on column H, you would understand the basic difference. This is the compounding rate in case of compound interest, which is the main differentiating factor, which would make you earn better returns than the simple rate. As you can see, the compound rate increases year by year. So it was 0.1, which is the same. For year 1, 0.1 remains the same, even for compound interest and even for simple interest. But it is year 2 onwards, you will be able to enjoy the difference between the both. Year 2 onwards, you will see that interest is charged not only on the principal, but also on the accumulated interest in the previous year. It is interest on interest thing which creates a difference between this compounding rate and the simple interest. That is the power of compounding, which will not only create a huge difference, but you will be able to enjoy more returns, which is to say that amount at the end of the period, at the end of expiry, would be much more in case of compound interest than in case of simple interest. Over here, I have calculated interest earned in column C. As you can see, interest earned for simple interest, column I, is uniform, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. But in column C, you will be able to note the difference. It is 10 in the first case, 21 instead of 20 in year 2, 33.1 instead of 30. And the best part of this is that I have just shown you 10-year in this case, but as you move further ahead, you will be able to see that this gap widens. For example, over here, it was just maybe a 1 INR gap for year 2. But for year 10, if you see, interest earned is 159, whereas in simple interest case, it is just 100. So I can very, very easily conclude that 100 rupees after 10 years, when compounded annually at 10%, will give me the amount 259 along with the initial investment, which was 100 in compound interest case, whereas the same thing, if I calculate it on simple interest basis, will give me only 200. Now I have just shown a 10-year thing for clarity, but when I was calculating the graph, I decided to show all the 25 years. So now if you see, in this 25, you would be able to see the difference. Over here, if I again show you my slide, you would see that the compound interest, which is the red line, is giving you the amount of 1083. And the simple interest is just giving you 200. This itself defines the difference. And this tells you the benefits of compound interest. Hence, it is always better, the age range of the audience I am addressing, it is always better to go in for such financial instruments which gives you the compounding rates. Because then there are two benefits. Number one, your returns will grow faster. Number two, there is hardly any risk associated with it. Like, it is not associated with any underlying. If this is the rate, it remains, and you get the benefits over a period of time. Now, I would just like to change the nomenclature a bit. When I say nomenclature, I mean I used the term A over here, amount, P over here, which is principal. But I would like to change the nomenclature a bit, and I would use the term FV instead of A. And FV stands for future value. Instead of P, principal, I would like to use the word present value. So now let's see how the formula looks like. It is the same formula, but it looks somewhat like this. Future value equals present value into 1 plus rate n to the power nt as its power. So what does it mean? What does it exactly mean? So I took the example of 100 when I was calculating interest right now. So right now, if I take the same example of 100, what does it mean? If my present value, that means if the initial investment principal, let's say principal is 100, the present value is 100, then the future value will be 259 after 10 years. Are you getting what am I doing? I'm just replacing the present value with that of principal, and I took my principal as 100. So I'm just saying that value of rupees 100 after 10 years will be rupees 259. What would it mean? It would simply mean that the number of items you used to purchase at rupees 100 today, you will have to purchase lesser number of items in future after 10 years, but at rupees 259. Why? Because then your purchasing power will reduce. The worth of money, if I am to say, it is becoming more dear. It is becoming more expensive. Your purchasing power is reducing. Similarly, if I am to do this in a bit different way, if I just interchange, if I put in future value as 100, then conversely, I can say that 100 rupees today would be 90 rupees in past. That is, before 10 years, this 100 rupees would be 90.57. That is what is the time and value of money defining. The entire sentiment behind investments is that the value of 1 INR today, the worth of the same is not equal to what it will be tomorrow. Your value of 1 INR, the worth of it will definitely differ in the times coming. It's just that we don't know how much. That is the whole point of investments. This uncertainty of the worth and the value. But one thing is there for sure, that over a period of time, as we progress, our purchasing power, keeping the same amount, will reduce. I think I have gone for too much of number crunching now. It's time for a bit of fun facts. Okay, so a funny incident indeed, but a fact. There is a fact involved in it as well. In the year 2009, I was paid $200 in physical cash. And back then, I had no clue of what's to be done with the same. So I came home with the cash. I opened my cupboard, opened the locker, and kept it there. That's all I did. And I didn't do anything else. Now, in the year 2011, I was very happy to read the newspaper headline which stated that INR has depreciated against dollar. So what did it mean? That in 2009, when I was given $200, $1 was worth 48 INR. And now in 2011, when I'm reading the newspaper headline, I realized that the same $1 was not worth 48 INR anymore, but 53 INR. So hypothetically speaking, hypothetically at the end of 2011, when it was 53 INR, when $1 was 53 INR, I enjoy a benefit of what? 5 INR per dollar. Like $1 will be 5 INR. So I will be enjoying, let's say, 1,000 rupees difference between 2009 and 11. So again, assuming hypothetically, if at the end of 2011 I'm getting 1,000 rupee as the difference, then per year I'm supposed to get how much? 500 INR. So 500, 500, 1,000. But now, did you know that in 2010, the value of $1 was 44 INR, which is to say that rupee had appreciated. It had not depreciated. All right. So had I made any transaction in 2010, there would have been a loss of 4 INR per dollar. I would have lost like how much? 800 INR. Okay. So the fun being that without me being like, without me researching on any financial instrument, without me converting that cash into something, without me doing anything, okay, when I just kept the cash idle, I got my return in 2011. I did get. But then is it advisable to do that? Definitely no. I mean, I don't advise you that, start accumulating foreign cash at home. It is fine. INR is going to depreciate. No, we cannot assume such things. Yes, people do this when they open NRI accounts in bank. It is possible to accumulate foreign cash out there when you open your NRI account. You can deposit in dollar terms and all. But then for that, you need to be an NRI first. Okay, and then you can think of all of these. But then definitely it's not at all advisable to go for something like this. The fun being that without me doing anything, it just I enjoyed the benefits of INR depreciating. But the fact being that if at that age I was to do something, the best way would be to convert it in INR and to keep it in some scheme. Let's say in some scheme which gives me a fixed rate of return so that there is less of risk. All right. Why am I focusing on fixed rate of return instruments? It's not that I'm advising you to be risk averse or be riskless, absolutely. But then, given the age range of the audience, I believe, I mean, the younger you are, the better it is that you focus on those instruments which give you a fixed rate of benefits, okay, than you taking extra risk, it getting backfired. I think, I mean, at this age, I mean, at that age back then, when there was no regular income per month, I guess savings was the best. All right, I'm not saying go for only savings, but then it is better to go for those instruments which give you a fixed rate of benefits. All
Hi,
right.
ma'am. Sorry to interrupt, but we have a question on the chat.
Oh, okay, sure.
So, do you want me to read the question?
Oh, yes, please. That
So,
will be helpful.
okay, so Mr. Arpit Gupta wants to know if you can share some information on how we invest in USD or other foreign currencies and if it is advisable.
See, it is definitely advisable. I mean, advisable in the sense that yes, there are sovereign bonds. All right, there are different bonds where you can deposit, like when you can invest your money. There are foreign sovereign bonds of different countries. But then again, if you would want to do that, it is always advisable to first know which country are you going for. Like, for example, very theoretically, I'll just give you a very theoretical example. Any country where there is political or economic disturbance, it is not advisable to go for a foreign sovereign bonds out there. It is not at all advisable. All right, because then you never know what happens, what crashes, right? So in this case, I think it is better to hit the developed nations as such. Okay, if you really want to go for sovereign bonds, for the foreign sovereign bonds, and it is always better to look at the economy or how developed, or not how developed, but then the rate of growth. Okay, to focus on the GDP. All right, the growth of the same. I think these are certain factors which would determine how successful that sovereign bond would be in that foreign country. Shall I resume with my PPT?
Sure.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks for the question, Arpit. I am resuming my presentation. We can have more quick questions towards the end. Now, let me move towards another $1 million question, which says, where to invest. So let's say we have Sensex, Nifty, we have a list of the companies. We can see the red marks going up, with the green marks going up, sorry, the red marks coming down. So where to invest? Which company would I invest in? Hence, the question out there in front of you on the slide, that there is EPS, earning per share. As a company, or let's say as a shareholder, how would you aim to increase the earning per share? You've got three choices. Would you choose debt? Would you choose equity? Or would you choose a capital structure which is a mix of both debt and equity? Which one would you like to choose? Is the question I'm asking the audience now. You can please unmute yourself if you want to answer. Any one of you?
Yes.
Madam,
Okay, so I can see on the chats, I've seen Rohit, Vinay, and Priyanka replying both, and Samanvay also. Thanks. Thanks for your answers. Yes, you're right. Most of the answers are right. The desired capital structure of the company should be indeed a mix of both debt and equity. All right. So going back to the basics again, there are two ways you can raise funds for the company. One would be taking loans, taking debts, okay, issuing debentures. Companies issue debentures. When they issue debentures, they're actually taking the money from you, and with the assurance that they will be paying you interest regularly over a period of time. Companies do that. The second way, what companies do is they issue shares. When they issue shares, what essentially they do is they give you the ownership, okay, of the company by making you hold certain number of shares which you subscribe for. Okay, the more the number of shares you hold, more becomes your partnership, more becomes your ownership in the company, which is what is equity. And then we have a capital structure, a kind of capital structure where companies employ both these ways, debt and equity, to raise the funds. With this, folks, I would like to draw your attention towards one of the theoretical concepts of finance, which is called financial leverage. Please focus on the diagrams being given below. There is a man who's trying to lift a very heavy stone. Scientifically, okay, this can be possible with the term lever. Why? Because there is some pulley which acts like, the lever, the fulcrum, and the stone gets lifted by the man by applying small efforts. Okay, so just by applying very less efforts, he can lift such a heavy stone. In finance also, the term leverage means exactly this. What does it mean? It means the employment of low cost funds to increase the returns available to shareholders. All right. So as a company, let's say I am having shareholders and there is earning per share. Okay, there is return on investments, the profit that I get, PAT, profit after tax, and I need to distribute this among the shareholders. PAT by the number of shareholders will give me EPS, the earning per shareholder. If I want to magnify that, if I want to increase the value of the same, I need to have a capital structure. I need to raise funds through the employment of low cost funds, which is debts, by taking debts and loans. That is how my EPS would increase. My EPS would definitely increase by having a mix of both equity and debt. All right. With this, guys, I would also like to share with you that, when I say which company you should invest in, there are many factors which you can see. There are so many financial statements you can read, financial ratios. But then one thing you should definitely look out for is this mix of debt and equity. There has to be a mix. We don't want an extreme mix. We don't want zero equity and 100% debt. We cannot afford that, and I'll come to that later. Neither can we afford 100% equity and zero debt. All right, we need to have a mix of both. What is that optimum point of the mix is something which is to be determined by the company. There is no hard and fast rule. There is no such number which will give you a direct answer. But then there has to be a mix. First point is that there has to be a mix. And secondly, by merely by reading certain balance sheets of certain companies, you should be able to know that are the owners risk averse people, the ones who are running the company, the ones who are bringing these numbers on the balance sheet, or are they risk averse people? Like, are they risk lovers? Do they believe in taking extreme risks, or are they risk averse people? Which is to say that a balance sheet can be merely of two types in this sense. Okay, what do I mean two types when I say that, when you read a balance sheet, you see that there is a company which is only going for equity and there is no debt. That is being conservative. The balance sheet behaves in a very, very conservative way. Okay, it's a very narrow thing that, you are just focusing on equity and that you are not taking any external debt or any external source. On the other hand, let's say there is a company which keeps on taking debts and the equity is like merely like there is hardly any, but it keeps taking debts, it keeps taking loans from different places. At that point in time, what will you suffer from? You will suffer from insolvency if you are not able to repay. If you take debts more than your capacity, you are bound to be insolvent. You will suffer from bankruptcy. Okay. So in the course of increasing your EPS, it shouldn't happen that there is no EPS and that the company is on the verge of shutting down. Right? So the desired capital structure of any company, of whichever you would like to go in, should have a mix of debt and equity. With this, I would like to prove, or I would like to show an illustration which says that yes, financial leverage, the concept is indeed useful in increasing the EPS. Oh yeah. So I have taken the example of two companies, company A and company B, as you can see. Let's say the initial investment is 10 lakh in both. And how is it 10 lakh? It is issuing shares, 1 lakh shares of 10 rupees each. So it is 10 lakh in both the cases, company A and company B. Now the company needs extra funds. When company needs extra funds, it is ideally just having two ways. Either it will go for equity or assuming it will go for debt. Assuming there are just only two ways. Either it will go for equity or it will go for debt. Company A chooses to go for equity by further issue of 10,000 shares of rupees 10 each. And company B doesn't believe in equity, and it believes that it will take debt, 10% debentures of 1 lakh. All right. So, like I said, two companies were given the choice to raise 1 lakh. Company A raised it through equity. Company B raised it through debentures. Now let's focus on the calculations. We have earnings before interest and tax, very famously called as EBIT. EBIT is 11 lakhs in both the cases because the total capital now with both the companies is 11 lakh. Now, if I am to deduct interest from EBIT to come down to interest before tax, I am not calculating any interest on company A, but I'll have to calculate interest on company B, right? So company B has to pay an interest of 10,000 for the debentures it has issued. So now earning before tax for company A is 11 lakh and earning before tax for company B is 10 lakh 90,000. Are we clear so far with the calculations? All I'm doing is telling you that EBIT is 11 lakh in both the cases, and so far I have deducted interest only on company B and not on company A. So that gives me 11 lakhs for company A as EBT, earning before tax, and it gives me 10 lakh 90,000 for company B. Now I need to deduct tax to come down to earnings after tax, which is famously called profit after tax, PAT. If I'm to charge tax at the rate of 50%, are we or are we not appreciating the fact that company B has to pay less tax than company A? You see, company A is having 5,50,000 and this is 5,45,000. Not less tax, sorry, but then the amount of tax which company B pays, the amount left after that is 5,45,000 for company B, and for company A it is 5,50,000. Now, number of shares, which is how many shareholders is this amount to be divided in, is 1,10,000 in case of company A, and for company B it is 1 lakh. Can you now tell me earning per share will be higher in which case, in company A or company B? Definitely company B. Why? Because it has lesser number of shareholders now. It needed more money, it got more money, but it got more money only by taking debts, by taking loans, and it had lesser number of people to distribute it in. So EPS for company A stands at 5 and EPS for company B stands at 5.45. So that is indeed correct that earning per share would increase if you take lower cost funds such as debts. Like I said, you can keep on taking debts. You can keep on taking loans and you can keep on reducing on your equity share capital, thinking that there are lesser number of people to distribute the profit after tax. Hence, it is better that you keep on taking loans and everything. You take different loans from different banks, you issue debentures and everything. But then everything has to have a cost. Everything will have to be repaid. If the company is not able to repay the loans it has taken, the debts it is under, then it is definitely going insolvent. There are so many financial failures explaining the same in the real world. One of the examples which I can think right now when loan comes into my mind is Kingfisher Airlines. You take so much of loans from different banks. At the end of it, if you're not able to repay, then you're going to shut, right? So there are different parameters involved in it. You also need to look at your working capital. What exactly is your working? It depends upon the working capital which is required to do a day-to-day business. Okay, the return that you get when you run your business. Everything is dependent upon fixing a ratio, if there is any, between D and E, debt to equity. But there has to be a mix. Like I showed, if you take 100% equity and zero debt, you are not only very, very conservative, but then you are taking very less of risk also. If I'm to draw a risk relationship between, this equity and debt thing, I can say that if you go on for equities and you do not take any debts, then your earning will be very less. Your EPS will fall. Not only is your risk taking ability falling, but your EPS will also fall. On the other hand, if you keep on taking debts, you're taking too much of risk, and then if there is insolvency, there is bankruptcy, there won't be any EPS at all. So in the course of increasing your EPS, it shouldn't happen that there is no EPS. All right. So that is how you should see the balance sheet of any company. There are many other things which you can see, but then these are certain things that will give you a glimpse of how conservative or how open, let's say, how what are the risk taking abilities of the investors when they make the balance sheet. I spoke about investments, but to conclude, I would just say that the best investment is invest in yourself. I think that's the best investment. Of course, there are many other ways, but then invest in yourself, keep learning, keep growing. Like I said, finance is huge, huge, and that there are many number of things which you can focus on, but I mean, we can just highlight what we feel is imperative, which is what I've done in this case.
Excellent webinar.
So, folks, you can unmute yourself and you can please ask any questions. With the best of my capabilities, I'll try to answer them. So, folks, there is one more thing I would like to also highlight, which is that there are different kinds of investments you can go in for. In my examples, I just spoke for equity. Okay, the fixed income instruments that will give you fixed interest over a period of time. But then, I mean, these are traditional methods. Okay, your bank, equity, debts, these are all still traditional. But what is non-traditional is the commodity sector. Okay, the commodity sector, the real estate sectors, these are the non-traditional areas of investment where one can invest and also enjoy the benefits over a period of time. Like for example, gold. Okay, the gold prices, even they fluctuate. Okay, in commodities, you can consider gold, you can consider silver, similarly platinum. In real estates, when I talk about real estate, there are buildings, okay, there are properties where you can invest in, there is a piece of land where you can invest. So over a period of time, I mean, like as you grow old, maybe, like when you are in that age range where there is a very good, let's say, a mix of, like you get your per month regular income and then you have a side income also. I think at that point in time, you can take aggressive steps and you can go for the non-traditional investments also. Of course, commodities and all is very, very, very minor. But as far as real estate is concerned, which requires more principal value, I think you can do it at that point in time. I think that answers one of the chat questions which I have just received. Any
Good
other
evening,
questions?
ma'am.
Yeah. Ananya?
I'm
Yeah.
Ananya. Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. Ma'am, I want to know whether I should go for CFA or MBA. Right now, I am in first year, ending in the first year, and I really can't think what should I do for CFA or MBA.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Ananya. Thanks for the question asked. Ananya, it all depends upon what your interest lies in. I mean, if you are, let's say, if you want to go for equity valuations, if you want to have a career in equity valuations, then I guess there is no other study better than CFA. I think CFA is the best career to pursue if you want to see yourself solely for equity, for for any of the market instruments. Okay, for let's say the equity portfolio, for equity valuations, reporting of the same. All right. I would say go for MBA if you still feel that you want to open your career, or let's say you want to have a profile which is also outside of equity valuations. Let's say you want to go for financial reporting. Let's say you want to go for financial management, financial and business management. At that point in time, I think it is MBA in finance that will help you. I mean, if I'm just to talk in a very layman way, I would say that CFA L1 is exactly similar to whatever you will study in your MBA. It is level 2 and 3, which will give you the USP of being a CFA. On that note, definitely you will enjoy the benefits of being a CFA in countries like, in places like US, okay, which recognizes the degree, which owns the degree. Okay, whereas over here in India, there are indeed, what I have felt is that there are indeed less of roles, less of job roles which are focusing only on hiring CFAs. There are for sure, but then um, if there is a competent MBA in finance along with you, they may want to hire him as well. All right. So, from a career perspective, from the study viewpoint, if you're an equity fan and that if you just want to solely focus on valuations and market growths and etc., then I think CFA is the best for you. Otherwise, MBA opens a plethora of opportunities for you. Apart from equities, okay, it also opens avenues for reporting, for not audit, but controllers, from financial controllers point of view. So yeah, it depends upon your.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And ma'am, what are the courses or skills that need to be done, to get in, the finance field, to be an expert in finance?
Okay. So, see, firstly, your theoretical knowledge is something extremely imperative. Okay. Keep your concepts crystal clear. I mean, when you are sitting on this side of the table and when the interviewers are asking you, it's fine if I'm not saying it's fine, but then it's okay if, your current affair, or let's say your current knowledge of whatever is happening outside the country is low. I'm not saying it's fine, but what is more important for them is to see how clear your concepts are, how clear is your theory. That is something which is much more important to them than you having other knowledge and everything, which is also fine, which definitely is an advantage. But then right now, I would like to say, please keep your whatever you study, please relate that to whatever happens in the real world, to the markets and everything. Follow the markets, whatever is happening. That's the first thing. The second thing which I would like to say is that see, when you join, when you're on the job, at that point in time, you can be trained. If there are certain things which you do not know, there are certain things you can be trained on. But then right now, the kind of financial analysts the market needs are those people who are aware of different tools, okay, of different systems. Of course, you need to be very good at Microsoft Excel. That goes without saying. Microsoft Excel is a must thing. But then you need to be also aware of different add-ins of Microsoft Excel. You need to be aware of SBase. You need to be aware of other alternatives of Microsoft Excel, for example, Alteryx. Then you have different system like Paragon. All right. So it's better you also invest in those things, in knowing how that particular system operates and what is the advantage and what is the USP of using that system. Why a company goes for that system and not any other. I think it's very important to know that also. So Microsoft Excel is a must, but then there are different things also which would definitely place you at a better state than your competitors.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for answering the question.
Ma'am, I have one question.
Yes, Shubhankar. Yeah.
Yeah, ma'am. Right now, I'm doing MBA in finance in second year. My exam is completed, but right now I'm looking for internship in the capital market. But I check that in all the companies there should be like that they required finance intern, but they forced to sales the mutual funds and all these things. How we can tackle these? Because right now I am prepared to be as a fund manager for the future. But these types of the finance internship, the person said they should do the sales. After that, you get the internship, then all this. How can we these things?
Sure, I do get your pain. Okay, so Shubhankar, one thing. See, nothing will go without any numbers. Okay, you are talking about sales, I understand, but then they would also involve numbers, right? Not that you are completely away from finance. That's not the case. I think what you need to do in your case is, if you are looking out to be a fund manager, if I am to understand that correctly, then I think what I would have done had I been there instead of you is that, all right, sales is there. Okay, let's say there is no way to avoid that. This is the company I am interning in and I have to do the sales. Fair enough. I know the numbers now. What I'll try to do is I'll try to move step by step. For example, let's say I'm in the back end right now. I'm not even in the back end, but I would like to go to the back end of the funds, the back end reporting. I would see how that happens. From back end, I would like to go to the middle area, which would be coordinating between the front and the back end. And I think middle area is where it will be fun, because then you would exactly know what the front end is doing and you already have an experience of the back end. Plus, you can also have a good expertise on being a financial controller on the very same place. So I guess, move step by step if you can. Right now, as an intern, I would say that you are at a you are at an early stage. All right, not that you have an experience of so many years and everything. You are comparatively at an early stage. So move step by step. All right. If you are in sales and all, I'm sure it is tough to jump. And we all know that nothing happens overnight, right? So right now, if you are doing the sales, fair enough, this is what is it, you can't change it, but then move step by step. The next step should be to see what is happening in the back end. And then once you're in the middle area, you exactly know what is happening. In the middle office, you know exactly what is happening, how are the front end people placed, what is the back end reporting and everything. And maybe then you could escalate accordingly.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hello, ma'am. Ma'am, so we have another question on the chat. Kushal wants to know why 98% of people fail in the stock market and why 2% of the people succeed, and he wants to know the reasons why.
Well, why 2% succeed? I'll come to that later. I'll come to the second part later. But then, Kushal, I would just say that given the kind of market India is, like given the country India, we were always focused more on equities, if you would see. Like when it comes to investment, we were always equity fans. We were always talking about share markets and it was all equity for us. There was no bond market for us. I mean, have you ever heard of, someone saying that I hold so many bonds and this is what I do? No, but you will always hear people speaking, I've purchased that much of shares. I am also into this company. I have purchased now. Zomato is coming up with IPO, so I am there also. So we were always and always, as a country, traditionally, historically, we have been equity fans. We were always an equity market since beginning. That perhaps answers the first part of the question, that 98% population goes for equity. All right. I mean, if you look at the developed nations, if you look at US markets, UK markets, I don't think 98% of the population would go there for equities. No, I think they're more or less diversified. Definitely, there are equity holders there also, but then they don't have such high numbers the way India has since beginning. Okay, now why only 2% succeed? Okay, to that. Well, there are. I would like to take this question. I mean, I would focus on markets more than anything else. Okay, so we as a country also faced a lot of scams. We had faced 92 scam, correct, where we had invested shares in certain companies, in ACC Siemens. They took us so high, and the very next day things were crashing. All right, that was a loss for us, right? 92 scam could be an example. One example of failure would be, the world crisis, the 2008 financial crisis. Something happening there also affects us. Okay. At the end of the day, it's very, very difficult to know the exact reason. But then, yes, I would like to highlight the fact that when it comes to market, when it comes to equities, it is the sentiment and the philosophy which drives the market numbers. Okay, it is this philosophy. I mean, for example, Zomato IPO. We all know what Zomato does. Okay, well, if you ask me, I would say I would equate it to Swiggy and say that it is in food delivery sector. All right, we all know what companies they do. All right, it is the sentiment, it is the people's sentiment which drive the numbers up and down, and not really how hardworking the employees are and other stuffs. It is all the market sentiment which drives them. All right. COVID came, markets crashed. Okay, it is just exactly that thing. So I believe a little bit of unsaid, undefined market sentiments, and along with that, the different global parameters also, global and to certain extent environmental parameters also, which play a huge role in reducing the numbers. And like I said, I mean, Kingfisher was one of the examples I was talking about. We used to see Vijay Mallya as such a huge tycoon. I mean, he had so many followers. Did we ever know Kingfisher Airlines is going to crash? Back then, at least I had no clue that soon this company is shutting down. So all those people who invested, I really don't know. I mean, about their shareholding and the losses which they underwent. But then, like I said, when people invest in different companies, it all depends upon what exactly they look at and invest. All right. Today in my slide also, I just showed certain basic things which you should look out on. You can't have 100% debt against a 0%. Agar वैसा होगा, companies are bound to shut down, right? And there is going to be a huge ripple loss. It creates a ripple effect, a dominoes effect, right? So, I mean, there are different reasons why people fail. And yeah.
Hello, ma'am. Hello, ma'am. I'm Pragati. Hello.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Ma'am, as per you answered Ananya's questions very well, but I just want to know a CFA after a
Hello.
MBA finance is a good choice or it will be a good choice?
I'm really very sorry, but I could not hear the question. Requesting the coordinators to repeat the question if one of you could hear.
Pragati, would you like to type your question on the chat box?
Okay, ma'am.
I think meanwhile Muskan has a question.
Good evening, ma'am.
Hi.
Yes, ma'am. You were talking about leverages earlier. So I wanted to know, as an investor, uh, what kind of degree of leverage should I be looking for in a company? Like most, the two of the leverages, they check out for changes in EBIT, right? And one in sales and the other one in EPS. So what kind of leverage should I be looking on? Like the degree precisely?
Sure. So, see, there is, I mean, I will not be able to give you the exact number because like I said, there is no hard and fast number as such into this. Okay. But then, if I am to look at history, I would say that it is always better to focus on the degree of financial leverage, DFL, and not the operating one much. Because I think, I mean, the reason for bankruptcy, the reason that we have for insolvency are all given by the degree of financial leverage. All right. So I think that is something which you should look out on, the degree of financial leverage. That will,
Okay.
I mean, that is, as per me, that's more.
Okay, ma'am. So, ma'am, there are certain firms that play an important role in terms of manufacturing. Like they're operating, the core business lies in operation. So, is that a signal that we should be looking for DOL more than DFLs?
So it all depends upon the companies also, the kind of sectors they are in. For example, let's say 90% of the business is revolving around manufacturing. Okay, then of course DOL. Then you will have to by default look at the operating leverage. But then, like I said, in history, I don't remember coming across companies failing because of DOLs. It is at the end of the day DFLs which fail. Okay, like, I mean, manufacturing, of course, it does get affected. I'm not saying that it doesn't get affected, but then, like I said, it all depends upon the
Okay.
sector you are in. So yeah,
Okay, ma'am. And one last question.
sure.
Since you're in a corporate sector now, so I would like to ask you this, that do you people really use the IRR method when you do the capital budgeting?
We do use IRR. We focus more on MIRR, which is a modified internal rate of return.
Okay,
So
okay.
given both the projects we have, let's say A and B, I'm just giving you a very lame example. Let's say A and B, we focus more on MIRR.
Okay, okay,
That, yeah.
ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Hello, ma'am.
Rohit, yeah.
Yeah. Ma'am, can you suggest me best BBA course?
Sorry, can I suggest what?
BBA courses.
VBA.
Uh,
Did I hear correctly?
yes, ma'am.
Okay, so Visual Basics, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so okay, like in my place when I sit, um, I use the products coming out of VBA, but I have never really gone into VBA as such. Okay, so products arising out of VBA, I mean, it's like the program which gives me the end result. Okay, but I have never gone into VBA and coded as such. I mean, I've never been a part of coding as such. We are the people who will use the Visual Basics end product, but we are not going to as in make any changes to the same. For that we need to learn program languages, okay, which I sitting in my seat have not so far. But then yes, if the role demands by default, I'll have to. Okay, but then I do remember using VBA at the time of calculating options. So when I calculate option pricing and all, yes, VBA is required. But then, like I said, we have always been the end user. We have not gone into the coding part of VBA basics as such.
Hi guys, I just want to remind you, please keep the questions related to finance, investment, and financial management. And also there are some other questions on chat if you'd like to answer, ma'am.
Okay, I think again one of the $1 million questions would be which company shares gives us the best returns. Okay, tough, very tough. I mean, I would have been Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, don't you think? Had I had a 110% correct answer to that. Maybe at max, what I can tell you is that you could look at different parameters which will tell you that yes, this company is good, this company is bad. Um, See, overall, I will say, I mean, you can always and always go for sectors, okay, which you feel are flourishing or will flourish over a period of time. When I started investing into markets, I knew somehow, I mean, I trusted the fact that pharma will do well. Okay, and I don't regret that decision. Pharmaceutical companies are doing good. Not all, but the ones I invested in were are doing good. So, like, it all depends upon different factors like volatility. Okay, back then when I was looking at pharmaceutical sectors, I was focusing on Sun Pharma. And when I looked at the past returns and when I calculated the volatility factor, it is called Vega. Okay, when I calculated Vega, I found the Vega way too high for my level of investment. I mean, I need to be like a good risk lover investor to go for Sun Pharma. Since I did not have much confidence in Sun Pharma, did not give me much of confidence, I decided to go for Cipla. And yeah, Cipla is doing pretty well. I mean, not pretty well, but yes, it is giving me returns for sure. Best returns? Which one will give you best returns? That is very tough to reply. Like I said, there are different things you can see for a company financials. When I say different things, as in short things. Okay, short things. Like I said, D is something very short. Okay, so try to look out for short things which gives you enough confidence that yes, this is there to stay. This is not shutting down any soon. And I can tell you something which is there to stay in Sensex in the market will grow over a period of time because Sensex overall increases period of time, you know. So I would just say that, I mean, you have your own parameters and everything. Set your own parameters, see which one is correct. Read more about financial statements. Okay, if you find D is not so worth, fair enough. Look at the parameters you think is worth of and look at the companies. You will be able to decide for you.
Ma'am, can you give me your LinkedIn ID?
Can I give you what?
LinkedIn ID, LinkedIn.
Sure, I will. Sure, I will.
Okay, so I think the session has come to an end. Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us today and providing us with such valuable insights. I'm sure everyone present here are taking home some important lessons from a great session today.
All right, thanks to the coordinating team and thank you for all the questions asked. It was great addressing all of you.
Also, to all participants, thank you for being an active audience. I hope all your questions have been answered.
Ma'am, LinkedIn ID.
I have sent the feedback form on the chat again. Kindly fill it to receive your certificate of participation. Thank you all once again.